then the integration of the chitta and of the physical elements, the dhatu, as they exist in that time, are understood to be much more subtle than when one is in deep sleep. This is so because sometimes after sleeping for a long time, when one wakes, one still feels aches and pains in those parts of the body upon which one was lying. But when the chitta withdraws from this type of samadhi, there are no aches or pains of any sort at all, every part of the body being in its normal, natural state. This gives one good reason to believe in the truth about those bhikkhus who are said to enter into complete cessation, nirodha samapatti, for several days. For it is said that, firstly, they can in fact remain in samadhi for such a long time, and secondly, their health and body remain normal without any weakness or harm from it whatsoever. Dhamma talk amongst Dhutanga bhikkhus generally revolves about the results of the practice which they have done, which derives from the level of attainment that they have experienced, and also about the places where they have done the practice in various locations. This is the way in which the truth of their knowing and seeing by way of the heart is passed on to each other, and it gives them all food for thought for a long time. Their talk never concerns the world of samsara, of business or politics, of gain or loss, love or hate, of anger, loathing, envy, vindictiveness, or jealousy, nor are they ever even suggested, for their only concern is the practice of Dhamma. However long they go on talking, which depends on what is necessary, it is a means of uplifting the chitta of the listener, so that he drinks it in deeply and is permeated with Dhamma the whole way through. This is a most excellent occasion which is well described in the saying of Dhamma, Galena Dhammasaka Tsayetam Mangalamutamang. Talk on Dhamma at the right time is the highest blessing, because such talk is between those who are all practicing the way, and their aim is knowing what is true, and seeing what is true, and promoting truth, and not at all for boasting about degrees and levels of attainment, nor about how much one knows and how clever one is. Each one's citta is poised all the time, waiting and interested to hear the truth while each of the others are presenting it. But if any one of them, when talking, is seen to be deficient or mistaken in any point, he is always ready to submit with genuine and heartfelt respect, and to accept correction from one of the others whose ground of Dhamma is higher. Such talk is a way of checking the knowledge and understanding and the state of the citta of each other in connection with the attainment of samadhi and the path, fruition, and nibbana, maggaphala nibbana. When such bhikkhus have full confidence in the value and wealth of practice of each other, without feeling any doubts or reservations, they can talk together intimately and reveal to each other all the Dhamma that they have within them, without holding anything back or keeping anything secret. In this way, those who practice can get to know quite clearly what ground of Dhamma each of them has attained. This bhikkhu has such and such a ground of citta and a ground of Dhamma. That one has a subtle citta. That one has a high level of wisdom. That one is close to going beyond becoming and birth, whereas this one here has already gone beyond it and is free from all anxieties and can relax. As for this one here, he is lazy and weak in his meditation, and when he sits in samadhi, he just nods his head and sleeps inwardly. In fact, wherever he sits, he just sleeps inwardly, for this one is most skilled at sleeping inwardly. Therefore, amongst those who are Dhutanga bhikkhus, one should not assume that every one of them is entirely good. I also once became skilled at sleeping inwardly, but I don't like to boast about it. This bhikkhu here, his citta is steadily becoming calm. This one is beginning to develop into samadhi. This one has strange knowledge about external things such as the pretas, ghosts, and devatas. This one likes practicing meditation while sitting down. That one likes practicing while lying down. That one prefers meditating while standing. This one likes to discipline himself by not lying down. This one by reducing the amount of food he takes. This one by fasting. This one likes to discipline himself by going into the forests to look for tigers or bears as a means to help him overcome fear, by examination and inquiry into it while using the tigers or bears as the cause of the fear. This one likes to discipline himself by walking about looking for tigers in the hills at night. This one likes to receive mysterious guests, such as those who have deva bodies. But this one here is afraid of ghosts and pretas as if his parents had brought him up in a house of such beings and dead bodies about the place to scare and haunt him all the time, so that after he was ordained he was in the habit of being afraid of pretas. This one here has a nature which easily accepts and believes anything which anyone says, and he does not like to think it over first to see if it is reasonable before accepting it, whereas this one here has a lot of opinions and does not readily agree with other people. This one has a nature to be clever, and every time he likes to examine and think well about things before accepting them, and he does not believe blindly. When the Acharya teaches them Dhamma, after he has finished his talk, a bhikkhu of this kind will probably have various questions in his heart which he will ask the Acharya, and a dialogue then takes place between them based on reason. The others who were present would thus be enabled to increase their own knowledge and ability in many ways by hearing this dialogue, and this is a good method of assisting those who are practicing the way to develop their mindfulness and wisdom. Such a person is an ornament to those who accompany him. He gives dignity to the circle of those who practice the way, and he gives a feeling of confidence to the Acharya who trains and teaches him. Wherever he goes, and whatever bhikkhu he stays with, everyone feels confident and assured about such a person. When he goes to stay on his own, he endeavors to look after himself properly by using reason and Dhamma, without doing anything that would lead to deterioration or loss to his friends and associates who practice Dhamma. When contacting lay people, he acts in a proper and seemly way, never getting too involved with them, for in the field of Thutanga bhikkhus this kind of thing is always liable to creep in. Although generally speaking this is not done intentionally, yet a lack of skill and carefulness of one kind can also cause loss of virtue of another kind. Another thing which is always likely to occur in those who practice happens when the citta attains samadhi, for then it becomes calm, firm, and is not distracted or upset by the world. The heart then tends to become unusually eloquent and witty, which can easily cause the one who practices to forget himself. He may then think that he has become skilled, although in fact he is not, for he only begins to gain some skill if he first tries to work at the practice without forgetting himself. But those who practice generally forget themselves in this way more than any other, because they have never known such a thing to happen before. For this is the first step of virtue, calm, happiness of heart, and stability of heart, which is attained by those who practice, and therefore it makes them excited so that they can forget themselves. If then there is nobody to warn such a person, he may become self-confident in the manner of someone who knows Dhamma, and having the conceit that Dhamma has arisen. The eloquence can then develop into giving clever Dhamma talks, and later he may think that he is skillful at such talks, and that Dhamma has developed in his heart. However much he talks, the Dhamma flows out more and more, as though it were water in flood, without limitation or restraint, until finally he becomes engrossed in talking and goes on incessantly. Before he realizes it, many hours have passed by in talking or giving a discourse on Dhamma, and this happens every time. In making contact with people, he has no idea of time, whether it is appropriate to speak or when to stop, and his discourses have no ending, no erang. However much Dhamma he has in him, he digs it out to speak and discourse to whoever comes to see him until it is all out, without knowing why they have come. He just shares out Dhamma without any restraint, regrets, or thrift, and even though there is not a lot of Dhamma in his heart, he still likes to spread it about to his heart's content. He keeps spreading it about without developing it and protecting it by working at the practice, which would act as a dam to prevent the Dhamma in the heart from flowing out. But instead he does damage to it by not knowing when he has gone too far. Even the level of the water in the ocean can drop, and the heart that is neglected so that no work is done to develop Dhamma in it with little time being given to it, is bound to go the way of deterioration and to drop in level. So the citta which shares itself out much without also doing any work on its own development is bound to deteriorate and go lower and lower all the time until there is nothing left in it at all. Finally, all that remains is distracted thoughts and vexation throughout his entire mind. If he tries to make it settle, it will not remain still, and he cannot lead it into a state of calm as he once used to. From having been calm and cool, his mind then changes and becomes conceited, vain, flirtatious, disturbed, and gloomy. And whether standing, walking, sitting, lying down, or in any other position, it is as if his heart is on fire, and he cannot find any calm and peace. When he cannot find any way of escape, he thinks then of going with the fire, which is the way to make the situation still worse, although he does not realize this. Thus he thinks, when there is only vexation, disturbance, and disquietude like this all the time, why should I remain in robes and be a burden on the sasana? It is better to give up the robe, for I see no value in going on like this. I must disrobe, so as to get free from the anxiety which comes from emotional troubles of this kind, and thoughts which have not been auspicious all the time since I became a monk. But even after giving up the robe, such a person will not become auspicious by this type of thinking, and will still be lacking in virtue as he was before and useless as he was at first. In saying that he would lighten the burden on the sasana when he gives up the robe, this is not so, for the sasana will be no lighter, and in fact it will just be the sasana upholding the truth as it always has. Summarizing this, the one who is not good is self, the one that is no use is self, and the heavy-heartedness due to wrongdoing of the heart is self. This should teach one that whatever kind of wealth one has, if one only spends it and disperses it without saving and replenishment, it will diminish and finally vanish. The same is true if the heart is allowed to drift and go according to its fate. The result will be trouble and vexation, which one must oneself receive everywhere and at all times, because moral actions, good and evil, are not the fortune of just anybody, but only of the one who has done them, and he alone is the only one that can receive the results of them. The Lord therefore taught that one should be very careful and well guarded, and not abandon oneself to one's emotional impulses. For when the bad results of one's actions have come upon one, they make for great hardship, because these results are far more heavy than a range of 100 mountains. Wise men are therefore afraid of them, and have always taught that one should be afraid of evil, and this they still teach right up to the present day, due to the fact that they know clearly that the results of Dhamma, both good and evil, are not things which change and alter from age to age. In the manner described above, the two Thanga bhikkhus from the most senior to the most junior can know the ground of the citta of each other without the need for insight knowledge, jnana, to find out by going deep down inwardly. Because these Dhamma discussions that take place amongst Kammatthana bhikkhus are reckoned by them to be very important, and they take place regularly all the time, for they look on them as a means of exchanging knowledge and experience with each other, and as a means of sammodhaniyakatha, arousing joy and inspiration in the Dhamma which they have variously practiced and experienced. When the occasion arises for them to talk together, it is up to any of those who are present to speak of something which he has come to know, which may be more or less gross or subtle. Then, while they are talking, one has an opportunity to know about them. But when two of the acharyas talk together, the more exalted they are, the more interesting it is. Their Dhamma is all at a profound and high level, and it leaves one with a sense of wonder. One feels so inferior and ashamed at one's own meager ability, vasana, in mindfulness and wisdom, that one wants to go and bury one's head in the ground, for one is quite incapable of experiencing the kind of thing that they have experienced. While listening to the acharyas talking together, it is fascinating and wonderful, and one feels so strongly that one wants to know and to see in the way that they do. One feels almost as though one's heart would break. But where has the mindfulness and wisdom been buried which should enable one to experience as they do? One doesn't know. Even if one looks for it in one's thoughts, one searches for it in vain, for all is dark and obscure, as if nothing good or special will ever happen which would satisfy and bring some joy to one's heart for the rest of one's life, so that one will die with this corpse full of stupidity in vain. Looking at the others who were also there listening, they seemed to be so dignified and calm, as if they were flying towards the complete destruction of their kilesas, leaving one behind, oneself who is so incompetent that one cannot find the mindfulness and wisdom to save oneself, and leaving one to die alone submerged in the round of samsara, the vatta. The more one thinks, the more one's chest feels constricted and the heart apprehensive, as if it had been thrown out into the jungle, desolate and lonely. As soon as the Dhamma meeting is over, one quietly goes and asks the others who were present, "After listening to the talk on Dhamma, how do you feel about it?" For I felt almost as if my heart would break and I would die on the spot. The Dhamma which they talked was so amazing and wonderful that when I reflected and looked at myself, I seemed to be like a crow perched on top of a golden mountain. When I thought about it, I wanted to bury this corpse in the ground to get rid of it, thinking that this would probably lighten the load on the sasana by relieving it of the dead weight of an unfortunate member lacking in inherent ability, as I am at present. But how was it with you and the others who were present? How did you feel about it? Please tell me truly, so that I can use it as a lesson in Dhamma, which will enable me to breathe more freely, and to get rid of this feeling of depression and hopelessness, as if my heart was about to break. Generally, those who speak up have much the same sort of thing to say, because each of them feels a great satisfaction in the Dhamma of the Acharyas. Then they turn and reflect on themselves, for they want to be like that also, but when the essential conditions, hetupaccaya, for this are not there, disappointment arises. This then results in feelings of discontent, dukkha, in various ways. But as soon as they hear the same story from the others who are also learning and training in the way of Dhamma, they feel relieved and breathe more freely. Then they become determined to go on training themselves without being anxious and afraid that they will not be able to do so, or will not be able to attain this or that state, which is an unnecessary way of hurting oneself. Where we previously discussed how some Todanga bhikkhus are daring enough to put their lives at stake by going and sitting after dark in those places where tigers roam about in search of food, and how some bhikkhus also do such things as wandering about at night on the hills searching for tigers, this may make some people doubtful or make them disbelieve that it is so, because such things may make one question, for what reason should bhikkhus sit in such places or go about looking for tigers? Even just sitting in the vicinity of his dwelling place is enough to make someone who is timid so frightened that he can hardly breathe. So why should he use such excessively daring methods? For the ordinary monk would never go to such an extreme unless he was a bit mad. And in truth, this is how it should be. But the stories of some bhikkhus contradict this, for they overcome the fear that arises when sitting in the vicinity of their dwelling place in the same way as they do when sitting or walking on the hills where tigers live. However, the fear that arises when one is alone and close to one's dwelling place is of one kind, and a suitable method may be used to overcome it. But the fear which they are searching for in various ways, such as going to the mountains and sitting on a rock, or searching for tigers, is incredibly strong, much more so than the fear that arises on one's own near one's dwelling. If they had no effective method of overcoming the fear, it is quite likely that they would go mad when they actually met up with a tiger. Therefore, they must use a very different method to quell this fear until it can be completely vanquished by the skillful method which each individual devises to train and discipline himself. To train the chitta when it is afflicted with fear up to the point where it can get rid of its stubborn resistance by means of skillful methods which are well suited to the circumstances is a very important thing. The results which become apparent as soon as the chitta surrenders to mindfulness and wisdom are wonderful beyond all expectations. First, the heart turns round and becomes bold and daring as soon as the fear has been dispelled by those skillful and effective methods, after which the chitta remains completely calm without any fear whatsoever. Second, when the chitta withdraws from this state, the bold fearlessness still remains without going back to the previous state of fear. Third, this acts as evident proof to one's heart, showing very clearly how the chitta can be forced by disciplinary training to give up its stubborn resistance with the support and aid of various conditions, such as fear. Fourth, one feels satisfaction in training oneself by that method or any other with skillfulness of heart, and is not afraid of death. Even in training themselves by other methods, it should be understood that these bhikkhus do so with the confidence of having seen results from what they have already done. This makes them go on increasing their efforts to progress in the development of the Chitta and Dhamma in the heart until they reach the goal that the heart longs for. In consequence, the training of the heart or of oneself, which the Thutanga bhikkhus undertake, is of many different kinds to suit their different temperaments. But generally, the methods which each of them use are those which have given them results in the past, and they must therefore go on working at those methods constantly, rather than any others. People's characters differ, and there are some whose chitta loses all mindfulness, which is required for self-control, as soon as fear arises, and they become as if hypnotized, and the same thing happens to them every time, regardless of what it is they are afraid of. Such people are not suited to the methods of training which use frightening situations, for this could cause them to go mad. So the type of ascetic training which is used must take into account the character of each person, and which methods suit them and enable them to gain strength of heart. One should not just take up a method that one has heard about as giving good results, without taking into consideration the nature of one's own chitta, for by doing this, one is liable to get results which are not what they should be. This is said not for the purpose of increasing the weakness or feebleness in those who practice the way, but only to point out that what one does should be suitable so that one will gain value from it in accordance with one's state or condition. For when they come across this passage, some people might think that whatever they find to be tedious, difficult, and against the grain is not suitable. Thus, it is not suited to my character to be doing such things, because someone of my type is suited to living comfortably, and there is no need for me to have fear of various kinds to hit me in the heart. I can live eating and sleeping comfortably, which is a much better way and suits my character which likes comfort. But one should recall how the Lord Buddha, the first bhikkhu and arahant who is the refuge of the world, was able to attain enlightenment and the fulfillment of Dhamma by strict training and discipline more than by any of those other methods which lazy and feeble people call good. Nobody has ever got to the fulfillment of Dhamma by the way of living, eating, and sleeping as the heart desires, without ever opposing the chitta and applying disciplinary training to the heart. These forceful methods of training have been described based on the understanding that the kilesas of people are only likely to be afraid of being overpowered by vigorous training, rather than by letting the heart go wherever it will. If one uses some force, it will submit a little, enough to open one's eyes and breathe freely. But if one gives way and goes along with them a little, they gain encouragement, and the situation deteriorates greatly. One must use many ways and means of discipline and training to frighten the kilesas in order to gain some peace, and those who want to see the submission of the kilesas for themselves must take up and use these strong methods as the tools of training and discipline in ways that are appropriate to their individual characters. This may be a way for them to bypass the kilesas from time to time and to weaken and eliminate them bit by bit. This will also reduce the discontent which torments the heart step by step, until they reach the place of safety, which is the territory of happiness and joy, by using these methods to help them. Those bhikkhus who have gained results from training by using these strong and tough methods truly make gains which are clearly visible and apparent to the heart. Usually this is because the chitta which needs to be trained in this way is characteristically bold, and likes to put everything into whatever it does without vacillating. When fighting, he fights truly. When dying, he dies truly, but he does not give up. Thus, when he goes to train himself to overcome his fear, he looks for a place where he can do so truly, like where he can take tigers for teachers to help him in his training. The more frightening he understands a place to be, the more he sets himself to go there and train himself in the manner of a life and death struggle. At such a time he is even prepared to die, and asks only to see the disappearance of fear brought about by the superior power of mindfulness and wisdom which are the basis of the training. He submits himself entirely. Otherwise he would never be able to train his heart, which is already frightened in a frightening place. But in fact he is able to withstand it until he sees the awesome power of fear, and how it cannot compete with the awesome power of Dhamma, so that it then dissolves right before his eyes. In place of the fear, a bold fearlessness arises, quite clearly evident, and this gives testimony to the methods of training that he has used, that they are not valueless, but in fact have the greatest value, beyond even what one can imagine. With some people, the heart becomes calm as soon as they hear the tigers roaring in the vicinity. With others, as soon as they hear the feet of the tigers walking in their own natural way, unguarded and unconcerned as to whether anyone is interested in being unafraid or afraid of them, then straightway the chitta concentrates and goes down into a state of calm. There are still others who, if they work at their practice in the normal way, their chittas will never be able to submit and drop into a state of calm, but as soon as they use the method of going and sitting in meditation in a path or place where tigers normally walk by, then although the tigers may not actually be passing by at that time, the chitta can turn round and go down into samadhi by depending on the thought and the fear that the tigers will come looking for them. There are two methods of practicing meditation when fear arises. In the first, one makes the chitta concentrate and stay with that aspect of Dhamma that one has been in the habit of practicing, without letting the chitta go away outside to think and imagine about any animals or tigers at all. One's meditation practice just remains with that aspect of Dhamma, with mindfulness to supervise and control it. Then, whether one will live or die, one takes refuge entirely in that aspect of Dhamma which one is using as the initial entry into the meditation, parikamma. As soon as the chitta gives way, goes down as one hopes, and truly takes refuge in Dhamma without grasping at this or that, it is bound to become calm, and once the chitta drops into a state of calm, the fear vanishes immediately. This is the method of practice of someone who is in the beginning stages of meditation practice. The second method is used by those whose chittas are able to attain samadhi and have some basis of heart. When fear arises, they will most likely investigate the situation using the way of wisdom. In other words, they analyze and examine the fear, and they analyze and examine the whole of the tiger part by part, which the chitta assumes to be such a frightening object. Thus they consider the teeth, the claws, skin, head, tail, and the middle of the body, going through every part, bringing it up and looking at it to find out in what way it is frightening, until their nature is seen quite clearly with wisdom and the fear disappears by itself. This is the method for those who have been used to practicing the development of insight, vipassana, and they will probably be able to cure the fear by the use of this method.